Now moving the mixolydian scale across those three chords in blues can be a bit of a challenge. But I've developed a shortcut for that, and I've called it inner logic. Let's get into that. So in the previous section we've seen that there's not a lot of difference between the mixolydian scale on the one chord G7 and the mixolydian scale on the four chord C7. It's basically just one note, which is this B note on the G mixolydian scale, which becomes a B flat on the C mixolydian scale. So whenever you go from a G7 to a C7, the only thing that you have to remember, lower the B to a B flat. Now you can see this very clearly if you look at the chords. You see here that the G7 has a B note on the third string. When you move to the C7, you see the B flat here on the third string. So what you see is that the major third of the one chord G7 wants to go down and resolve to the flatted seventh of the four chord C7. Now we'll call this inner logic. Whenever you move from a one chord to a four chord, like we did here, there's a form of inner logic. And there's another spot where we can find inner logic. Take a look at this G7 chord. You have the pinky here on the second string. Now that note, second string, sixth fret, is an F note. That's the flatted seventh of a G7 chord. Now look at this C7 bar chord here. The note on the second string now is one fret lower than the one that we had on the G7 chord. This note on the second string, fifth fret, is the major third of the C7 chord. Now this means that the flatted seventh of the G7 chord wants to resolve to the major third of the C7 chord. Also, inner logic. So what we can do is we can define inner logic as follows. Whenever you move from a one chord to a four chord, so a G7 to a C7, the major third of the one chord wants to go down to the flatted seventh of the four chord. And the flatted seventh of the one chord, excuse me, that one over there, wants to go down to the major third of the four chord. Now this is of course the case in all keys. So whenever you move the tonic one string down and stay in the same fret, inner logic kicks in. So if you have a G to a C, got inner logic. And it of course also works when the tonic moves one string up, two frets down. And that's the case when you go down from a D to a G. So when you move from a five chord D7 to the one chord G7, there's also inner logic. The major third of the D7 chord that you can see here is on your fourth string, which is an F sharp. That one wants to go down to the flatted seventh, same string, of the G7 chord. And the flatted seventh of the D7 chord, which is a C note, wants to go down to the major third of the G7 chord. So inner logic works from 1 to 4 and from 5 to 1. Now this principle we can use in accompaniments and in solos. And by doing this we'll make our playing like a lot more logical, and we can avoid playing the wrong notes at the wrong time. So inner logic is a very important part of this course. Whenever you go from a one chord to a four chord, like we did here, from a G7 to a C7, the major third always wants to go down to the flatted seventh. So major third of the one chord goes down to the flatted seventh of the four chord. And the flatted seventh of the one chord wants to go down to the major third of the four chord. Now this happens when you go from a one chord to a four chord, but also from a 5 to a 1. So this is the heart of this course. If you know this, you'll be able to play your accompaniments a lot more economical and stay in one place at the neck. So really study this stuff.